Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. Thanks for listening. We're joined by Janice Dahnke. She is Director of Student Services at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. Janice, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Discussing today, how do we welcome our students with special needs into the classroom? Tell us first a bit about what you do as Director of Student Services at Seven Oaks.
So as Director of Student Services at Seven Oaks, my job or my mission is kind of to look at all the students in a way and see what needs they have in order to be able to access an education and specifically a classical education. So under that umbrella, there are a few things that I'm going to focus on, and that certainly is students with IEPs or students with the 504s, and also students that need MTSS or RTI or need that intervention before we move on to a plan if it's needed. And so I'm going to work with those students and also with my team to make sure that all of their needs are being addressed, in addition to also working a lot with teachers and helping advise them and find ways that they can help all their students learn better.
Can it be daunting? Can it seem daunting for teachers to welcome a student with special needs into the classroom?
I think so. I think there's this element of the unknown. So it's just kind of human nature to fall back and kind of, I won't necessarily say stereotypes, but what you know about different disabilities or things before, or perhaps a student you've had before. And so teachers, or at least the teachers that I have experience of knowing, in the most part, they want to do things really, really well. They really want to help these children, and they feel a sense of pressure that it's on them to make that happen. In addition, when you're running a tightly run class, you also like an element of control, or at least perceived control. Mm-hmm. And so having a student that may be a little bit different or is unknown can feel kind of scary and a little bit unsettling.
For a general education teacher, what do you think are the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to welcoming students with special needs to the classroom?
I think many of these things are the same things that you would do to welcome any student, but specifically I would think, the first thing is remember that you're the adults in the classroom, and that may seem a little bit silly, but remembering that, it is your duty to be in charge and have a clear understanding of where you're moving and where you're going in the class. I think also doing it with confidence. So any child, but particularly a child that has needs, they're looking to you to kind of tell them like how they should feel about situations and how, know that what they're doing is purposeful. So if you're a teacher that has that clear idea and is carrying themselves with confidence, you're communicating to that student that they're okay, they're in a safe place, that even if something unexpected happens, you know what's coming next. And I think in many ways that gives a teacher like a higher sense of authority in the classroom than, maybe putting lots of names on the board because a student's not doing something right. I think just starting out with that base level confidence really helps. In addition, I think A teacher really needs to believe that they can make a difference in all students, and particularly these students with challenges. Sometimes, just in the day-to-day, you can get to the point where you're not seeing the progress that you would like. And so you start to doubt yourself, or you think you can't help. And as soon as you feel that way, that's a huge game changer. You won't make the sort of progress that you want. So taking control of your thoughts and kind of telling yourself and keeping that belief that you can help all children regardless. I think another thing that's helpful is focusing on like what I call self-concept over self-esteem. So in our culture now, we've kind of switched to thinking about self-esteem, that we need to feel good about ourselves, we need to love ourselves no matter what. Whereas self-concept is more of the belief in what you're able to achieve. And what we need to focus on is helping these children believe that they can achieve great things, but also be very honest in that. We're not saying you can be anything you want. If you want to be whatever it is, we're not doing that, but we're saying, okay, you can do this next thing that's in class. It's going to be hard. You may even have to work harder than the students around you, but I'm here because, again, we have the authority, we have the confidence. I'm here and I'm going to help you, and we're going to do this together. So I think that's really important. I think something else that I had heard one time in a training that I attended that really was a game changer for me, and it's something very simple, is looking at behaviors as unmet needs. And I think, it doesn't change behaviors. They're still there. They may still be frustrating. But I think when you see them as being unmet needs, it shifts the focus from the child has to change to that focus of what can I do to help this child? Now, we never will be able to, and it's not our job to meet all needs in all areas for every student. But looking at and just recognizing that will help us how we feel about those behaviors and also help how we go to address them. I think a final thing is recognizing that how you talk to a child in your classroom, how you treat them is a signal to how other children should treat them. So if you're maybe really nervous and you're not sure and you seem skittish and you seem unsettled and you're kind of not sure what's coming next, the students will start to feel that way. If you have a student that has lots of behaviors that you're calling out frequently because originally you're thinking, I need to call out every single thing they do wrong so that they can learn. And why this is kind of an ugly word, but like nagging them, sometimes it can feel a little bit that way. If you have that approach, the other students will try to start to treat that student that way. So being very aware that your interactions is changing how that child's experience is going to be, but also how other children were perceived students who are different.
Can you build to a point in which that classroom is full of supportive students who are, assisting is not the right word,
right,
but are play a part
yes,
in the education of that special needs student?
Absolutely. I think so. Now, children are children, right? So there's always going to be different behaviors happening at the same time. But I think if you as a teacher focus on kind of this supportive language and being encouraging and do that with all of your students, I think that'll start to trickle out. I know that I've had one situation in my experience where a student would really struggle with big emotions and we might have to evacuate the classroom. And so that's a really tricky situation. That's not what we like. But one of the things that I did do and go back and talk to the other students about, I was like, wow, the student's having really big feelings. That's hard. Do you like people watching you when you're having hard feelings? And all the students were like, no. And I was like, oh, so I'm going to do this for the student, but I would do it for any one of you. And kind of, don't want to say normalizing, but bringing them in and like drawing those connections that just because they're experiencing something bigger and different, as humans, right, we have this kind of shared experience. And so creating that kind of understanding and that support doesn't mean permissive, but it does mean having a better understanding. For
a teacher who might not know where to begin, where's a good place to start when it comes to preparing for the student with special needs?
Right. And you'll hear me say this frequently. It really is the same that you would do for any child. So fortunately, how we set up a classical classroom in our network and how we kind of look at it is going to be beneficial for all of your students, but also the student with special needs. So the first thing is, making sure that you have a calm space with limited distractions. So not lots of things on the wall. It's all purposeful. making sure, thinking about your desk placement. So in many, traditional public schools, you're starting to see pods, so students' desks facing each other as they work together. We want our desk oriented towards the front, towards the teacher, so they can see the instruction, but then also spacing them out. And that doesn't mean like equal spacing. There may be that student that needs a little extra space for whatever reason, being thoughtful about that. I think also having a visible schedule in your classroom. Again, this is helpful for all students, but I know at our school, at Seven Oaks Classical School, in grades K through 5 at least, we have a visible schedule on the front board. So by having that schedule, that actually is a relief to many students. They know what to expect. Now, you also have to do that teaching that it's not going to always run perfectly minute to minute, because you have those kids that become clock watchers and say that we may have a little bit of a play. But also recognizing that if you are going to have a significant change, you kind of warn the students that this is going to come. And so you have that in place. Another thing is to consider like the lighting and the smells of your room. So, our buildings are what they are, and we can't always perfectly control the lighting. But particularly with fluorescent lights, sometimes turning those lights off and letting the windows that natural light, if you have enough, can be something as simple as that, can be a game changer for some students. Also, we all like pleasant smelling environments and things like that, but recognizing that, some candles and strong scents can be overwhelming to certain students and can even cause headaches and other things like that. I think making sure that you have clear procedures and simple directions. Again, these are all things that work for all students, but having a plan and having students know what comes next. So for a child who, again, is having trouble attending or is being bombarded by all these things in a way that we're not, knowing exactly what they need out for literacy essentials, that it's only going to be their pencil and their paper and they're not going to have anything else out, is kind of a relief in many ways. I also think making sure to incorporate lots of movement breaks. So sometimes in a classical school, because again, we're so focused on these kids learning great things and we kind of get stuck in the curriculum, realizing that it's equally important for all children to have movement breaks. And so having that time that, they focus really hard for a certain period of time, but that there's a chance to get up and stress in a very controlled way. Again, because we're always kind of looking at all the factors. So having not just stand up and stretch whatever way you want to, because sometimes that can lead to chaos, but maybe having a specific routine that you go through with your students can really, really be helpful.
If a student is an IEP, how much can that really tell you about the student that you're about to have in your classroom? How much can you learn by prepping in that manner?
Right. I think a part of it depends on, is the student new to your school? Did your school write the IEP? But even then, a paper can really only tell you so much, right? So the IEP is going to tell you some strengths about the student. It's going to have their accommodations in place and their goals. It'll have their diagnosis and what their disability is. But I think taking that time to, yes, you need to read through that IEP and make sure that you're familiar with it and you know it, but taking the time to, realize your connection and your partnership with student services or the SPED department. So those people that have been working with that student, talking to them, also realizing that a part of this educational team also includes the parents. So recognizing that, something at my school that I started doing that I realized was so, so helpful is anytime I have a new student that has an IEP or 504, even before the school year starts, so I've already been meeting with these families during the summer, I have them come in because there's something about hearing about the student from the parent's perspective, and even inviting that student in, just that knowledge of, what are their different challenges and what has that look like will really help set you up for helping that student. And it actually starts that first step in the process of really excellent communication with the family, which will be an important part of the picture.
During the academic day, is there any particular time that can be most challenging for students with special needs?
Absolutely. And again, this goes back to difficulties for any student, and that's transitions. So it's those little bits of time that things aren't laid out quite perfectly, that the teacher isn't actively teaching. So that could be between subjects. So when they're getting something else out, it can also be, recess or that unstructured time. It can be moving in the hallway to the next thing. And so thinking about transitions and really planning for that is something that's really important, particularly for our students with special needs. And so, one thing that's really helpful to do is give your class a notice if you have a transition coming up. So they're doing independent work and that's going to end in, say, 5 minutes. You're going to let the class know, like, okay, class, you have 5 minutes to finish up, but you might need to go to that student that has challenges and say, okay, so in 5 minutes, we're going to be finished. Are you going to be done with this? And help them visualize and think about what that transition is going to look like. And they're going to say, no, or, whatever it is, and be like, how are you going to feel? Because many students feel unsettled if they're not able to finish that work, and talk them through that and be like, okay, well, you're going to feel upset, but you're going to be okay. And kind of helping them through that is really helpful. Also have a routine for something as simple as your class lining up to move to the next space. Certain children do better next to each other. And as a teacher, you'll learn that very quickly. Having the foresight to think and place students in a position that they'll have the best chance of success is really helpful. Some students may need to be in the front of the line. Some students may need to be in the back of the line. Some students may need to walk with you. But it's always in a spirit of, you're helping that child and you're teaming together. So if you have a student that needs to walk with you, it's not because you can't do these things, you have to walk with me. It's, oh, these things are really hard for you, so I'm going to help you, and for a while you're going to walk with me, and then we're going to try to get you back in line. Because again, the point of accommodations and any sort of help is not to keep the child stuck there, but it's to give them the tools that they need to learn to overcome those challenges. And so we're always keeping that in mind. I think, having procedures for early finishers when you're working. So when students are done, many students, not just students with special needs, they will rush through their work and then they're done and they have nothing to do. And we all know what idle hands lead to, right? And so having a very clear idea if that's when students finish, they may read a book or practice math facts, thinking through that empty time. And then I think really kind of the last, big thing to consider is recess. Knowing that at recess time when we want the kids to have kind of freedom to run and play and do the things, that this is actually a time that you need to be very vigilant, even though you've been working hard all day, being able to walk around with them and keep, eyes on things. And then also, our school does utilize walking during recess as a consequence because body movement and things we know are good for children. But something that I always did that really built a great relationship and I felt like was a game changer in many ways is when I had a student I taught for a year, 3rd grade. If I had a student that had to walk, I walked with them and so yes, it's a consequence, but during that time, and maybe we talk about, what behavior led to this consequence, but sometimes it was just, talking about life or casting a vision, like what are you wanting to do? And you can turn something that might seem negative and even a loss of time into a really productive game changer for you.
Parents are going to have ideas, suggestions, helpful tips. They might not think about it because it's an everyday thing for them. So as the teacher, is it okay to be the one to reach out to the parent to ask those questions?
Absolutely. I know for my own children, I always looked at whatever their current classroom teacher is as almost co-parenting with me for the year. And again, it's not that the teacher has the same responsibility, but we know in order to parent well together or to partner well together with someone, a communication is a big piece. And when you're talking to parents, if you're really truly open and curious and in that spirit, that helps a lot. Now, we do want to prevent that balance of it becoming the parents dictating what happens in the class. So we do have to have a really good understanding of our school, its mission, its policies, what classical education is and what we're trying to achieve. And we're going to always bring it back to that. But looking at, different suggestions and fully considering them for a moment is something that we need to do. Often, a parent, if you just listen to them and hear them and be like, yes, you're the experts on your child, and that's really helpful. I like that. In our environment at school, I'd like to keep the spirit of it, but it's going to look a little different. And we're going to do it this way because we're really trying to help them grow. And it might be a little hard at the beginning, but because you've set us up for success, you've told us this information, you can really change it, into something like super productive. So I think including the parents is a beautiful way to make great gains with any student.
If a teacher is still a little nervous or unsure they have done what's possible to help make a student feel welcome, what tips or suggestions might you have?
I think touching on what we just talked about, meeting with the parents, having that chance to sit down and not waiting till, I know like our school has a back to school night where students bring in their supply and all the children are there at once and there's lots of noise and things like that. I think, even though our teachers give so much, I think taking that time to set up a meeting outside of that is a great idea and will pay you more. It'll be worth it in the end. And so taking that time to have the parents and even the student in to meet with them, see their needs, kind of understand things, talk about what you see that student's experience looking like. I think also kind of making sure that the parents are making a fully informed decision about committing to that year at our school. We're not scaring parents away, but we want them to understand that it might look different than their expectations. So taking that time to go through this is how our school approaches this issue and things like that can be really helpful. I've also seen it work more than one time where we had a new student that was coming to our school that had a lot of physical behaviors, hitting other children, throwing fits, things like that, that I took the time to actually talk to the student in front of their parents and say, I'm so excited that you're coming to Seven Oaks. This is really great. I want you to know about some things about our school. So at our school, we don't hit, and go through those things. And what that seems like such a simple thing, you would assume that children would know and that their behavior is not going to change. Sometimes that transition into a new place and taking that time, so especially when you think about students with autism or some different pragmatic issues, taking that time to explicitly talk through things, even though it seems overly simplistic, can really change their behavior. And we've had students that have come to us spending a lot of time out of the classroom or with those behaviors that we see a minimal amount of that. And so those things can really help.
Any other strategies or considerations that might be helpful for teachers to have in their toolbox?
I think one of the first things I would say is don't underestimate the power of humor. And so as teachers, we take our jobs very seriously. When a child does something that's unexpected, sometimes, our tendency might be to very firmly, I don't want to say reprimand, that sounds strong, but firmly let them know that they've stepped out of bounds. Sometimes if you make it a little playful, you can take a child that might react in anger and turn it around to they're kind of laughing with you, and it kind of eases the tension. I think also being really mindful to watch for escalations and have a conversation with that student before they get to the point that something egregious or an infraction has occurred. So, many teachers will tell you that as soon as a student walks in and puts their backpack away, they know how their day is going to be because you see the signs of them being dysregulated or grumpy or things like that. And so watching for that, also realizing that again, at our school, the student service department, we really partner with the teachers. It's not separate departments doing their different things and approaching things. It's really that connected, that working together. And so I encourage my teachers, if they have a child that they can see, okay, it looks like it's going rough, let me know, and I will find time in my day, no matter what, to go down and pull that child out and just be like, hey, how are things going? It seems like it's a little rough, because many times having that conversation, maybe they're really worried about something, maybe they're just tired, and either I can help them process through that, or perhaps I can just give them a reminder, okay, I always tell my students, your feelings are fine. I'm never going to tell you that your feelings are wrong, but is it okay to let your feelings control you? Does that make those actions okay? And they'll say no, and talking through that and reorienting them and just letting the student and the teacher know that, we're in that partnership. Many times we can turn things around, not always, but just really being mindful of that. And I think kind of a last point to, consider when you're thinking about this is also knowing that many students come with many, many challenges, many behaviors. If you try to point out every single thing that they're doing wrong or correct it at the same time, sometimes that can be counterproductive. Again, that ugly word I don't like, nagging. Sometimes it starts to feel that way to the student. I think they start to feel down, the other class. It's disrupting your flow a lot. And it makes you feel bad, right? Because at least when I was teaching, I often felt like, why can't I figure this out? What am I doing wrong that's not helping this situation? And so taking that time to figure out what is the one thing that if just this thing changed, it would make a lot of things better. Doesn't mean that you ignore egregious behavior, but if I just focus on, I need the student to turn their voice off because they keep making noises and things, and that's like, it breaks my my concentration, the other students. And so focusing on that one behavior at times, often you start to see improvements, and then suddenly you're uplifted. So even though they're doing lots of things that we want to work on, you feel the reward of seeing improvement in that one area. And also it just helps for that better relationship with that child.
Janice Dahnke is Director of Student Services at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana, as we talk today about how we welcome our students with special needs into the classroom. Janice, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.